All right. So, ladies, we've just wrapped up genetics. So I'm going to introduce the next topic. I'll end early. That will give you guys some more time to work on those skulls if you need some more time with that. And I said we will come back to the skulls and the characteristics later on this week, okay? Probably Thursday or Friday. So we're going to be talking about evolution, and we're going to be looking at something called Darwinian evolution, because the word evolution can have many meanings, and often we don't use it correctly. So let's start with, what do you think it means? What do you think this means?
Darwinian evolution?
Yeah, what do you think it means? The series of what? The series of evolving.
How the theory came about.
No, but the word, what do you think that word means?
What word?
Say again?
Changing over.
Okay, changing over time. Yeah. All right, changing over time in response to the environment. Very good. So we have an idea that it involves change. We know that it takes time. And we'll start with that, okay? We'll start with this very simple idea of what is changing over time, okay? I'm going to start with a quote, because a lot of scientists feel that the central theme or the connecting idea in biology is evolution, okay? And so here is a quote. It says, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." Now, what does this mean? So let's say you want to figure out something about a family history. Now, maybe you have a genetic mutation that gives you a condition, but you don't know that. You have a condition, and your brother has the condition. What would you do to figure out, maybe try to understand this condition? What would you look to? The doctor? Okay, yeah. And what would your doctor do?
Your family history.
Say it again? Very good. You would look at your family history, right? You would look at, what, do your parents have it? Do your parents' parents have it? In other words, trying to understand what you have, you would try to look at it through the eyes of the history of your family, right? Say you meet a guy, and you want to understand this guy. And he's got some quirks, because all guys have quirks, right? What would you want to know about this individual? Would you want to know their background? Would you want to know, like, about their history, what happened to them as a child, their ideas, how they were brought up? Or would you not care about that? What do you think? My question is, do you think the way you are today is influenced by what's happened to you in the past? Of course it is. And we need to treat biology the same way. If you want to understand something, you gotta look at the past. You gotta understand it through the lens of evolution, which is looking at the past. To give you an example, you look at primates. Why are we the only ones that have very little hair? Why is that? How come? By the way, these questions I'm going to ask you, we're not going to answer them right now. We're talking about them later. Why is it that mammals don't see color very well, but reptiles and birds do? Why do mammals not see color very well? But yet we can see color very, very well, and we're mammals, but a dog can't see color very well. A bear can't see color very well. But we're mammals, we can see color very well. How come we can't smell things very well, though? How come our sense of smell is really crappy, but a dog's sense of smell is amazing?
Because of the way they live. Other senses are.
Why do we have the same number and types of bones in our skeleton that a raccoon does?
Actually?
Yeah, you'll see this.
Self-like.
Why do whales have lungs? Because they can drown in water, which is really stupid.
What?
You have an animal that lives in the water that can drown.
Is it? Is that still the environment?
Unless you understand the evolution of these organisms, it won't make any sense. It will not make any sense. So, keep this in mind as we go through this.
Wait, hold on. Question.
Yes.
How can a whale not
Drown?
Yeah.
Because it breathes air.
Yeah, but
If you submerge the whale long enough, it will die. It needs to breathe air.
so what like yeah, but when they're in eggs.
They come up for air though, Claudia.
Like marine land, don't they have an egg?
They come up for air.
Yeah,
Claudia.
what air? What happens if the air seals?
What's that?
Is that possible? Like, you know how like whale like wash up on shore?
But that's from a physics standpoint, they're too heavy to move around. So they end up dying because they can't go anywhere.
Okay, so like, but if they have like, they don't have whales.
Yeah, they can stay on. Yeah, they can stay on the water for a long time. Yeah, but they're really, really big, so they won't be able to move. It is very confusing. Okay, ladies,
Getting out of hand.
girls. So, this is a definition of evolution. It's you said change over time, but there's one thing we need to talk about: inherited change. So this is where the genetics comes in, because we study how inheritance works, right? We have a basic understanding of inheritance. We know how it works. So what evolution is, not just any change over time, it's change that you can pass on over time. And that means change that is inherited, okay? So things like lactose tolerance, things like cystic fibrosis, things like sickle cell anemia, are those genetics? Is that genetically determined? Yeah, so that's stuff you can pass on. If you change your hair color, you can't pass that on, okay? You change your hair color from black to blonde, your baby does not come out blonde hair. Unless your baby has the genetics for blonde hair. Alright. So, here's a question. If you go back 3, 4, 5, 600 years, if you look at the history of humans, by the way, do you know how long humans have been on this planet? Yeah, it's okay. That's fine. No.
Why are they all here?
How old are humans as a species? How old?
Is there an actual number?
I think we talked about this. It's about 150 to 200,000 years old. If you look at, so let's just say it's 200,000 years. If you take the 200,000 years and you would ask a human 100,000 years ago whether or not they thought life could change, probably the answer would be no. It wasn't until about a few hundred years ago that people started thinking maybe life does change. Why would the impression be that life doesn't change? Because you look around you, do you see any evidence that life changes? I mean, we know the weather changes, but do you see such things like raccoons giving birth to things that are not raccoons? Do you see any of that evidence? No. So, unless you have the right tools, unless you could see fossils, unless you have molecular, like DNA information, you would have no one understanding that things would change. There's no evidence of it unless you start looking. And that's what we're going to talk about. Where is this evidence that suggests that life has changed on this planet? It wasn't until about the 1700s when scientists started thinking maybe life does change. So here's a guy named Lamarck. He came up with an idea. It's an interesting idea. So he is one of the first to propose that things do change. And he said, no, I think things do change. And here's my explanation. So I'll give you an example. He would have said a giraffe. Why does a giraffe have a long neck? He would say something like this. He would say, well, you got these giraffes that are looking for food, and the food is really high up in the trees, and they have to stretch their necks quite a bit to get to the food. And he says, oh, and over the course of stretching their necks for their entire lifetime, their necks would have gotten longer. and the babies would have been born with longer necks. Now, Claudia's looking at me like, huh? Colucci's like, what's that? It doesn't make any sense. But you got to understand, it's actually a neat idea because he's actually saying something different. He's saying, I think things could change. Because back then, people thought, God made it this way. It's perfect. It doesn't change. I don't see any evidence of change. The babies of raccoons look like the adults of raccoons. I don't see anything different. They didn't know anything about antibiotic resistance. That's examples of modern day change because you couldn't even see bacteria back then. So he was bold. He said, I think things change. He got it wrong in explaining how the change worked. It's called the theory of acquired characteristics. And we know that doesn't make kind of sense, right? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But you know what? It's funny how things come full circle. My daughter the other day put on a pair of bell-bottom jeans. I'm like, oh my God. It's the 70s. They've come back. So sometimes we have now I'll be honest with you, this idea does not really make a whole lot of sense. But there is a little bit of truth to it. You can do something in your lifetime that will actually affect your children. You can actually acquire something in your lifetime that can actually affect your children. It's been proven. If you take up smoking or drinking or do hard drugs, it can actually affect your DNA and then therefore affect your kids' DNA. So there is some truth to this. But what we're going to talk about is the Darwinian explanation. So if you were to ask Darwin, okay, Darwin, explain the long neck of the giraffe. He would say, okay, this is the way it works. And this is what I want you to understand, okay? So we're going to be focusing on Darwin. Yes? You're right, I did. Carrot.
And it's even on
Oh my God, you are right. No wonder I'm a science teacher. Oh, we have our resident celebrity. Okay, so we are going to be looking at how Darwin would explain this type of change. So this is what he would say. He would say you start with a population of giraffes. And you know this very well that if you look around the room, not everyone's the same height. Not everyone's arms are the same length. I bet you if we measured the length of everyone's neck, it wouldn't be the same. Everyone's weight would be a little bit different. So in a population, we have variety. Do you agree with that? Of course you do. Otherwise, we would all look what? We all look the same. So he would say, okay, we have a population of giraffes. Some have slightly longer necks than others. And in this environment, if you have a longer neck, you can get more food. Because simply you can reach what? Higher up in the trees. If you can get more food, that means you have a better chance of what? Surviving. And if your long neck is genetically determined, if there's a mutation that gave you a slightly longer neck, and you have a better chance of surviving, that means you're more likely to have more kids. Because it's really hard to have kids if you're dead. That's a very simple idea. Okay? It's very hard to have kids if you're dead. So the logic is, if you have a greater chance of surviving, you have a greater chance of having more kids. Therefore, you have a greater chance of passing on the mutations that give you the longer neck. So Darwin would explain it differently. Nothing to do with stretching your neck. He would say it's because certain giraffes have longer necks. Now, he knew nothing about genetics. So when they asked him, well, explain this inheritance, he would be like, I don't know, I have no idea, right? Who was working out the genetics at the time? Mendel, the guy we just studied. Yep. Okay. So his explanation would have been different. By the way, we are studying the theory of evolution. Does anyone know what theory means?
The hypothesis.
Give me, no, hypothesis is not a theory.
Like a particular statement. That's why we got
Yeah, it's a statement, but what is it? Because we use the word theory wrong all the time.
What?
We say, I have a theory that my boyfriend is seeing someone else. That's not a theory. That's a guess.
It's an idea.
A theory is above a fact. It's a collection of facts. I'll give you an example of a theory that you know of very well. Theory of gravity. Now, how many of you want to climb a mountain and test that one? Not too many, right? Theory is not just a guess. So if someone says to you, it's just a theory, the theory is huge. It's huge. It's one step below a law. Okay, laws are things you can't violate. So, we're going to be talking about Darwin. My name is Charles Darwin. Okay. I'll come back to Darwin's history after you watch the video. Okay? So I want you to watch that hour and a half long video. Do you have to watch the whole thing?
No.
Okay.
So what part did you want us to go through?
The questions tell you what time there's a bunch of questions to look at, and it tells you what time in the video to look at. Yeah. Alright, so I'm not going to go into the history. I'm going to come back to his history. I'm going to come back to why did Darwin think the way he did. So I'm going to skip over a whole bunch of stuff. Don't worry, I'm going to come back to this, okay? But I want you to watch the video first. So, I'm going to talk about a few things.
That's not in our thing.
I know, I didn't give you all the pictures. I got to save ink, guys.
Why did you do that? That's what I don't
So, here's the question. So, what do you think, if I said to you, come up with a definition for the word selection?
Like natural selection?
No, just the word selection. What do you think that means?
Many categories.
Yep. Alright, category. So, for you to select something, what do you select? Give me an idea of something you
I
select.
select what shoes to wear. I
Okay.
sort flavor.
Alright. So, artificial selection is something that humans have been doing for a while. And basically, it's similar to picking your shoes. You have a certain criteria, and what you do is you get together animals that you think will give you what you want. So, for example, if you want to make a bird that has a lot of feathers, you look at all of the birds that you have at your disposal. You know, okay, who am I going to make together? Who am I going to put together that will give me babies with lots of feathers? What do you pick? You pick parents that have lots of feathers, right? You put them together. Dogs. You guys familiar with dogs?
I love dogs.
So, if I told you that all dogs are actually the same species, would you believe me? If I told you that a Rottweiler and a Maltese and a Doberman and a Saint Bernard are all the same species, would you believe me?
Yes and no. Because now you're like, well, they have different. They're all dogs.
Can they breed?
Yes.
Can they have babies?
Yes.
Would it hurt if a Chihuahua had a baby with a Great Dane?
Yes.
Yes. Oh yeah, it would. That Chihuahua would not survive. Now, here's the thing. If I said to you, okay, your job is to make guard dogs. Your job is to artificially select and get me the biggest, meanest, nastiest, most loyal guard dogs. Well, you want your guard dogs to be loyal. You don't want them turning on you. Right? What would you look for in your group? So imagine you own like a whole bunch of dogs and you had to breed guard dogs. What would you pick? Sabrina, what would you pick? Okay, something like a Doberman. Would you pick a Chihuahua?
No.
Why not? Too small. So you already have in your mind, hey ladies, keep it down. You already have in your mind what you would need to do to make big, scary guard dogs. You would look for Really big dogs, maybe aggressive dogs. What would be an example of a breed that's not aggressive?
A pug.
Pomeranian. Yeah, my Maltese is not aggressive at all. Okay. Unless licking to death is some sort of an attack.
Huskies aren't bad. I just watched Pick a Puppy, and they were picking a puppy, and it was like, they were so sweet.
So,
I wanted my skin. Oh, wow.
why am I talking about this?
Because you want us to learn. You want to see how evolution has brought us to long feathered change. Yeah, like to like make more than one of it. Like there's probably only one bird that.
All right, let's come back to this. So let's see if you can figure out why I'm talking about this. Okay. Which one's the rose?
Right. No, the left. Wait, which one's the shade rose or which one's the rose flower? Oh,
which flower is the rose?
Wait, no, that's right. It's both. Neither.
This is the original rose. So what happened here? Easy. Start with your idea that all populations have variety. You take flowers, so you have something in mind that you want to get. Flowers that are maybe more red and have bigger petals. You look at your group, your populations, and you say, okay, who could I make that has bigger petals, maybe brighter colors, and you put them together. And what happens over time is you get something like the rose. So the rose has been artificially selected.
Oh my gosh, I don't know.
I worked in a produce department for 17 years. Produce for 17 years.
At what store?
It was originally Miracle Food Mart, then it became Dominion, then it became AMP.
I remember.
Or was it AMP then Dominion?
Sprayer guys. You got the automatic.
What? You know what this is? What's this? Kohlrabi. This? Sorry, this? Brussels sprouts. These guys? This? This? What if I told you something really interesting? What if I told you they're all actually all the same thing?
They're
all related. They all come from the same species. So how do you make something that is like kale? How would you make something like kale over time? Yep.
Like they all look the same, but how does the flavor change?
Because well, you tell me. What are you selecting for? You selected for different parts of the plant. So how was kale made? Kale was made by breeding the plants that had the biggest leaves. How was kohlrabi made? It was the ones with the biggest and thickest stems. So what's going on here is this idea that if you have a lot of variety in a population and you select for things, you can make some pretty dramatic what? Changes. That's the idea, right? That in a population there's a great deal of potential for what? Change. You just need something to select it though. You need something to make this, what I call selective pressure, to drive the population in a particular direction. If you want to make cauliflower, do you breed the ones with the biggest leaves or the ones with the biggest flowers? Biggest flowers. And it all comes from what? The same plant. This tells you there's a lot of genetic potential in this plant. There's a lot of variety. And with that variety, you can induce a lot of change, but you need selection to do it. This is the original corn. Tiny little thing. Tiny little thing. This is the original corn. Okay? Again, artificial selection. Now, what we're going to study, this just shows us one thing. This shows us that populations can change. But when we look at Darwinian evolution, what's the main thing doing the selecting? It's not really humans. What is it? What do you think it is? It's right here. So would it be artificial? Now it can be, but it's good. We're going to talk about the role of the environment. And we're going to call this evolution by natural selection. Okay? So it's the environment that's going to be doing the selective process. The idea is really simple. If you have something that's not favorable, the environment won't like it. It will get rid of it. The opposite is true. If it's favorable, like having a longer neck. Now, is having a longer neck favorable? Exactly. For the giraffe, it was. And how do you know? How do you know it was favorable? They have a ridiculously long neck. And you got to understand. You guys did circulatory system, right?
Yes, but that was a year ago.
Did you think it comes at a cost to have such a long neck?
No, because by the time you breathe, you're out of breath.
You have to exert a lot of blood pressure to get the blood up. So, a lot of the things that you think may be advantageous, you got to realize they have a cost to them. And we'll talk about that as we go through this unit. Okay, so we're going to talk about Darwin, but I want you to understand there is another individual named Alfred Russel Wallace who actually came up with, okay guys, keep it down, came up with the same idea as Darwin. We'll talk about these two later on after you guys watch the video, okay? Here's a neat, interesting little picture. When you watch the video, they'll talk about when Darwin published his book. I will mention this now. It took him about 30-something years. He had this great idea. It took him about 30-something years for him to publish his book. That's a long time. You guys can't even wait 30 seconds sometimes to do something. Just do it. Why do you think he took so long? So here's a picture that came out. After he published his book, they published this picture of him in a newspaper. I can't remember the name of the newspaper. And do you think this is a flattering picture? No, it's. Why do you think they drew this? Right. Because how do you think people actually took to his idea? Yeah, it was very insulting to a lot of people. And a lot of people said, "What do you mean? We're connected to animals? What are you saying, that we evolved from monkeys or apes?" By the way, we didn't evolve from monkeys or apes. No, we will learn about that later on. No, we did not. Didn't. We'll talk about that. Okay, so notice I'm skipping over stuff, which means what? It's not that important. Alright, so, how do you know something has changed? Imagine you were a teacher. I know you guys are all aspiring to be teachers, right? How would you know if Sabrina copied her essay from Chloe? Now, Sabrina, you would be smart enough to know that you shouldn't exactly copy it, right? You would change a few things, wouldn't you? Well, you should. I hope so. You're probably hoping that the teacher's not smart enough to see that it's really the same as Chloe's essay. So here's the thing. We're going to do the same idea. If you want to know that something has changed over time, you're going to look for two things. You're going to look for similarities, but you're also going to be able to spot the differences. And that's what we're going to do to show us what is the evidence that things evolve. We're going to look at how they're related, the similarities, but we're going to look at what are the differences that they've accumulated over time. So we're going to look at things like the fossil record. So let's answer that first question. Why can whales drown? If you look at the history of the whale actually came from a four-limbed animal that over time evolved into the modern day whale. Now, so what had to happen to this creature? Well, one thing and by the way, I don't know why I keep forgetting. Oh, here, yeah, I do have the skeletons here. That's okay. So here we have probably what that land animal would have looked like. That eventually, probably the size of a wolf, I would guess. We can see it's got 4 limbs. This is probably an ancestor. Okay? You can see it's not the same as this. Here is something like Basilosaurus. And we can see what's happened to it. The skeleton's got longer. The limbs have gotten shorter. And the hind limbs, really, really tiny. Really tiny. And another big thing is the nostrils. Actually, you know this. Where do the nostrils go? Top of the head. You know the blowhole? That's the same as the nostrils. The blowhole is a nostril.
Yeah, I got a question.
Yes.
Where's the arm for the whale then? How did the whale get so big?
Say again? How
How
did
did
it?
the whale get so big? And like, how's the arm?
Look, that's a good question. Just a simple question. Why do some things get really big? But then why do some things get really small? Because not everything gets really big. And Claudia, I'm going to give you a really simple explanation. If there's a selective advantage to being bigger, natural selection will favor bigger. But if there's a disadvantage to getting bigger, natural selection will favor smaller. So I wasn't there. I didn't see the whales evolve. But the fact is, I would imagine that when you look at, because let's think about being big. What's the advantage of being big? Right. You can beat the crap out of anyone. I like that. It's a good explanation. But is there a disadvantage?
You're too big.
What's this name? You need more food. It's harder to move. You need more
You
energy.
need bigger clothing, which is really hard to find.
Yeah, but whales don't use clothing. Riza? Harder to hide from predators. So the idea is really simple. If evolution favors something, it's what I call, think of it like economics. There's benefit and there's cost. If the benefit outweighs the cost, then natural selection would favor it. So if the benefit of being bigger means you can eat more things, less things can eat you, and then the cost is it's harder to move, you need more food. If that benefit outweighs the cost, then you expect things to get bigger. But is that the case for everything? No, because there are a lot of little things. So for a mouse, it's not a good idea to be really big. Okay, it's not. Because otherwise they would be big. For them, the benefit of being big is not as big as the cost of being big. And that's why they're small. Okay? That's why. It's a really good question. So, I want to mention one thing about fossils. So you know what fossils are, right?
What is that?
What's a fossil?
A fossil is a dug up bone found very long time.
And you have skulls that represent fossils. Now those are replicas because the real things would be priceless. Now, I can't give you a fossil, right? Because that would be, I don't have the resources to get you real fossils. Now, so fossils are really, really old, and what do they show us? What do you think fossils show us?
Fossils show us that life.
Lauren? They show us transitions. So they show us the transition from a land animal to something like this. Now, I'm going to ask you something. Where do you think this lived?
I think that lived
Just based on its anatomy.
water.
Yeah, how do you know that?
Because you can't really go that in a swimming pool.
Look at these really short forelimbs. It doesn't look like it's been running very much. So I'm going to ask you to figure something out here. This animal probably would have done or behaved or lived in a very similar fashion to an animal that is very successful today.
Like water.
How about a crocodile? Okay. Probably the way this animal would have hunted, it would have stayed near, because you see how crocodiles hunt. They stay near the shore, right? And they just sit in the water. And then they wait for something to get to the shore, and they just come, they surprise them, right? They drag them into the water. Surprise, I'm here to eat you. Right? So these fossils show us the transitional forms. They give us an idea of what's happened. They allow us to put together links to show us the similarities, the differences. You're working on that with the hominid skulls. You can see that there has been some change, that the brain has gotten bigger, the eyebrows have gotten smaller, the foramen magnum has shifted forward, the face has gotten flatter. You can see all of those changes. And without the record, you wouldn't see that. But I want you to understand that the fossil record is imperfect. It's very hard to find a fossil. So, how often do you come across a dead animal? But compared to the number of things that are living on this planet, how often do you come across a dead animal? Not often, do you? Why? The environment doesn't care about safety hazards. That's your parents care about safety hazards. Because if something dies, somebody will come around and scavenge it, take it away, right? Like it's very hard to find something that's dead. Imagine how hard it is to find something that's dead that's been preserved for millions of years. It's almost impossible. You see this fish? This is a fish called the coelacanth. The coelacanth. If you were to look for fossil record, there were no fossils. Now listen carefully here. There were no fossils found of this coelacanth in the last 70 million years. In other words, if you were to look at 50 million years ago and look for fossils 50, you wouldn't find a fossil of this thing. It went blank. It went silent. Now, if there are no more fossils, you probably think that no longer what? Doesn't exist. Guess what? What do you see besides the coelacanth? It's a person. It's alive. Here we have an organism that we have no fossil evidence of it.
It just doesn't die.
No, it does die. What I'm trying to tell you is that just because you don't have the fossils for it, doesn't mean it's not there. Right? Doesn't mean it didn't exist. So I'm gonna see if you understand something. This is where I'm gonna end with, okay? See if you understand this quote. Actually, maybe I'll write it down so you understand this. What do you think that means? Did I repeat myself a lot?
No, not in this book,
Right. Like, think about this. For the longest time, did anyone see bacteria or viruses? No. So just because we didn't see them, does it mean they weren't there? No. So this just reminds us that just because the fossil record hasn't told us anything yet about this, that doesn't mean it's not there. I don't know, there's been in the last 7 to 10 years, there's been a discovery of all of these fossils in South Africa for of human ancestors, and we didn't know they were there until recently. So got to be careful with the fossil record, because it's rich on the one hand, there's a lot there, but it's not perfect. Okay. So we'll end there, and we'll continue on Thursday. All right, ladies, the end.